Hi guys, I'm Nadia.
And I'm Sydney.
And I'm Sarah.
And this is our podcast, Roundtable Talk. Today we are talking about Sir Thomas Malory's prose, Le Morte d'Arthur.
So, Le Morte d'Arthur is actually the first account in Middle English of the entire story of Arthur, and it has had the greatest post-medieval influence on later works. And so the title actually is French, and it translates to The Death of Arthur. It's composed of 8 total tales, and so the Broadview Anthology only contains excerpts from Tale 1, 5, 6, 7, and 8. However, today we're only going to be covering excerpts from Tale 1. So just a little overview. Tale 1 is about Arthur's birth and early kingship, and the role of Merlin in both Arthur's marriage and the founding of the Round Table.
So before we start off, let's get into a little bit more about Sir Thomas Malory. He was both a knight and a prisoner, and so this work was written actually while he was in prison. And he had a long list of crimes: attempted murder, extortion, robbery, 2 charges of rape, which could either mean sexual assault or abduction, which we found very interesting, and he was convicted of only vandalism.
Okay, the first tale that we're going to jump into is the tale of Uther and Igraine. And King Uther, he sends for the Duke Tintagel and his wife Igraine. And in this, Uther wants to sleep with her, but Igraine is a little uncomfy, so she asks her husband to leave. Uther also orders him to come back. They don't. He goes after them. So the Duke makes 2 towers. King Uther becomes ill because he wants Igraine so badly.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of similar to what we see in the Lancelot Grail cycle with Galahad and his love sickness for Lancelot.
And it's so weird because you are so in love with someone that you is someone else's wife you do not know, and you're becoming sick over it to the point where you have to send your sire to go get help, you know?
Right.
Gagging. Okay, so after this, Ulfius, he seeks help from the magic little Merlin, and Merlin says that he will help him as long as he gets his desire, which is the infamous baby that we all know is Arthur. Magic Merlin disguises King Uther as the Duke, and he rapes Igraine.
Which we have talked about multiple times in class. You cannot give consent if you do not know the full story. So the fact that Igraine does not know that she is not sleeping with her husband because he is disguised, or it's someone disguised as her husband, that is...
That's rape.
Yeah, point blank. So
she did not sign for that.
Yeah. Well, and so the catch here is that the Duke actually gets killed 3 hours before this act happens. So technically, she was not unfaithful to her husband, which they do use later to justify her marrying King Uther.
That's interesting how her reputation is kind of put in question over something that's not her fault at
Right.
all.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
So after this, King Uther and Igraine, they tie the knot. And she's now a married lady. King Uther finally tells her that it was him who raped her.
And she's happy about it. She's happy. This story literally states, the queen made great joy when she knew who the father of her child. She's finding out that the man who originally made her uncomfortable at the beginning of the story is the one who came to her in disguise and raped her and fathered her child, and she's just happy to have finally figured out who the father is.
Maybe she's just thinking about the child here, guys.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true.
Yeah.
But the child's not even hers because Merlin takes the baby and he gives it to Sir Ector to raise. So the baby's gone for now.
And then King Uther, he gets sick, cough, cough, and King Uther ends up dying, so we now have to find a king.
Right. So this is the story of Uther and Igraine. And so one thing I think we should kind of talk about here is the abuse of power. What do you guys think about?
Yeah, definitely the fact that, Uther uses magic to kind of deceive Igraine into sleeping with him. That's just raises questions about the ethics and the morality of him as a king. Also, him supposedly being the king and having the say in everything, being the top ruler. If he needs to go to Merlin in order to get what he wants, what does that say about his position as a king?
Yeah.
This is not surprising, though. I feel like a lot of people in power, use their abilities and what they have to get what they want.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
not surprised.
No.
But when it comes down to like rape and all that, that's a different story.
Yeah. One thing that's also kind of interesting to talk about is, was this part of Arthur's destiny? Like, is this part of this prophesized king, Arthur? Is this what was supposed to happen for him to gain the throne, you know? Like, was
Right.
this rape scene necessary?
That's a good point, because without this happening, we wouldn't have King Arthur.
Yeah.
Right. Without that happening, we wouldn't have this infamous story
Yeah.
of Arthur. So yeah,
And I
I
think-
agree.
Sorry to interrupt. I think that's just a common theme that we see a lot, is like whether these things are fated or always meant to be. Like, for instance, Lancelot and Guinevere, were they always fated to have this affair? It just gives the question of like destiny
Yeah.
and what's meant to happen.
And also, what does it say about Arthur's kingship if his birth is kind of coming from such an evil...
Right,
like,
coming out of deception,
Yeah.
lies.
Is
Yeah.
he the
manipulation.
rightful heir here, or
Right.
should this be someone else's role?
Right,
Yeah,
definitely.
That's a good point.
So we need a king now. And so that brings us into the next part of the tale 1, which is the story of the sword and the stone. So kind of summarizing this story. After King Uther dies, there's chaos because there's no clear heir to the throne. A mysterious stone with a sword appears with the inscription, "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king born all of England." So many people, of course, tried to pull out the sword. Anyone wanted the chance to be king here. But no one could actually get the sword out of the stone. So, funny enough, this young boy named Arthur, who had been raised by Sir Ector, if you'll remember, he doesn't know his royal lineage. He is just traveling to this tournament with his foster brother, Sir Kay. Sir Kay forgets his sword, and Arthur, being the good brother he is, goes and looks for one and comes across this sword in the stone. And without even knowing its significance, he easily pulls it out and he brings it back to his brother. And now Kay immediately realizes that this is the sword of the stone, and he tries to tell everyone that he must be the king, he must be the king. But that didn't last long. The second they made Sir Kay swear upon a book about how he found it, he tells the truth, and he says that Arthur retrieved it for him. They go to the archbishop to tell him how Arthur pulled out this sword, but a lot of people are just upset because he's a boy born of no royal blood. I mean, you guys would be upset, right? If this
Right.
little common boy comes and claims to have pulled the sword.
Especially after people have been trying.
So many people have tried. And so they don't believe him, and they make him pull the sword out over and over again. I mean, it probably happens like 3 or 4 or 5 times.
Right.
It's just over and over again. They can't deny the fact anymore, and they realize that he is the true noble king, and they rejoice. So he becomes king, but not all of the powerful nobles and kings are ready to accept him as king. We kind of start to see how Arthur's planning on ruling as king, and so to make peace with these kings that don't really think he should be king, he sends them these gifts, and instead of being honored or swayed, they reject the gifts outright. And so here's where Merlin comes in. He reveals Arthur's true birth and his royal lineage. And so even after the sword and the stone miracle and after Arthur's royal blood is revealed, some kings literally still refuse to accept the rule. And so 11 kings actually rebel, and they band together and try to make a war against Arthur because they see him as young and weak and unfit to rule. So this little young boy, though very brave, he still is lacking military strength. And so Merlin advises him to seek help. And Merlin tells him to seek the help of King Ban of Benwick and King Bors of Gaul.
So Merlin's role is very different in this telling because it's more of a helpful figure, more of a father figure. He really wants to set Arthur up for success because he did lack that military strength, which is very different than I think we've seen in previous representations of Merlin.
Yeah.
He's like the child of the devil in a lot
Right.
of these tales, and here he's more of a right-hand man.
Yeah, and it seems like he actually has good intentions
Yeah.
here.
This makes me like him a lot.
Right, definitely. And so back in the story, Arthur sends these messengers, and both kings agree to help out of respect for Arthur and for the promise of potentially a future alliance. And so Arthur defeats these rebel kings with Ban and Bors at his side, and his kingship is finally solidified. And so, again, Merlin comes in and advises Arthur that he should reward Ban and Bors for helping him, as well as his own knights. So I don't know if you guys remember, we kind of talked about this concept in class
comitatus, which is a social and military bond between a leader where the king will provide money and land to his knights and they give their loyalty back to him. And it's just this mutual obligation between a king and his knights.
So early on, we're seeing Merlin is playing this role in kind of how Arthur will continue to rule, because he has the round table and he rules using this idea of comitatus in the rest of his kingship. And so Merlin again is setting up Arthur to be this honorable king.
Right. And I mean, like you said, he's being helpful. He's trying to form the structure of the kingdom that he's probably seen himself through Uther, and knowing that in order to get these knights to be loyal, there has to be some sort of exchange and mutual respect. So he is kind of like a father figure to Arthur, trying to set him up, give him the keys for success, which again is different from what we've seen in the past.
Yeah. So now this is the part of the tale where we kind of just start learning the storyline of everything. Like we might have talked about some of this stuff before in class, but this kind of just organizes it for us, and we kind of just get a lot of background information. So Merlin disguises himself and he comes to Arthur asking for this gift, which is just to test Arthur's generosity as a king, and Arthur immediately helps him.
So here we see Merlin again helping Arthur out and teaching him how to be a humble king.
Right. So now we get to the part where Arthur lays his eyes on Guinevere for the first time. And so he's still this young boy, newly crowned king, and he visits Guinevere in her father's castle, and he becomes captured by her beauty and stays with her. During this stay, they become lovers, and she actually has his son, which in this story, his name is Bor, but he's commonly named Lohot in other stories of this legend.
Yeah, they say this name change was a possible connection to the Welsh world Lachu.
So after sleeping with Guinevere and having a son, Arthur sleeps with someone else, this girl named Morgause, who is King Lot's wife. So what Arthur doesn't know is that Morgause is the daughter of Igraine by her first husband, the Duke. So that is his half-sister. He doesn't know this when he sleeps with her. They have a son, and this is how Sir Mordred is conceived. And we all know Mordred. Mordred is prophesied to end up killing Arthur. Again, it's another child being born through an affair. A lot of important figures are being created through a man sleeping with another man's wife.
Seemingly in this world, all of the kings and storylines come out of, like you said, infidelity.
And if it's prophesized, it is literally prophesized through these evil acts. So then Arthur ends up losing his sword, and so again, father-like figure Merlin takes him to this lake, and there's this hand holding the sword out, coming out of the lake. And so here's where we see the Lady of the Lake, and she comes over because she is the one who guards the Excalibur. And so Merlin tells Arthur that if she gives him the sword, that he must promise to repay her with a favor in the future, and Arthur immediately agrees. So the Lady of the Lake ends up giving Arthur both a sword and the scabbard, which is the sheath. And so Merlin is adamant that the scabbard is even more magical than the sword because it will keep Arthur from bleeding in battle. And as long as he wears it, he cannot die from his wounds. So then just a couple more things happen in this tale. Merlin prophesizes that Mordred will destroy Arthur and all the knights of his realm. And so Merlin tells Arthur that he should destroy all the babies born on May Day.
Wow.
Which May Day is May 1st, and everyone born on this day is to be collected and put on a ship. And Merlin tells Arthur that the person destined to destroy him was born on that day.
Well, and so Mordred's put on the ship, and he actually survives it. So, I mean, we're kind of seeing that Merlin's not actually the greatest. Like, no. I know we were hyping him up earlier.
Right, he's very sneaky. He always kind of needs something in return. Like, even with his, back in our first story with Uther, he couldn't just help out his friend to, secure Igraine. He had to get the baby in return. And so also here, he's not really the most morally upstanding guy because he prophesizes that Mordred will destroy Arthur, but he insists on killing a bunch of innocent people for no reason, and seemingly.
That's honestly a great point. Like, it almost just seems like there's this ulterior motive.
Right.
Always. And he loves his power. He craves power.
He's been helping Arthur all along to build his empire, but makes me think it's just because he wants to get something out of it. He
Yeah.
wants to be that right-hand man like he was for
Yeah.
Uther.
I don't know. Merlin's this complex character. Like, you can analyze him a bunch of different ways, but there's no correct way, I guess, you know?
Right.
So that's kind of the end of the Sword in the Stone story. And I kind of just wanted to ask you guys, again, we saw this role of fate here because a lot of Arthur's like upbringing, childhood, it kind of seems like fate plays this huge role. So I don't know, what do you guys think about that part?
I agree. I mean, he stumbled upon the sword.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't like he did not know his royal lineage, and he was just helping out Sir Kay, and it turns out that was the Sword of the Stone, and that's what made him be recognized and announced as a royal. So that definitely was fate playing a role.
Yeah, he did an interview for this role.
Yeah,
so
right.
Arthur's role in his early childhood and how he led things, it just shows in his fairness to the Lady in the Lake, how he promised her a reward back in return for her favor. And it's just showing the theme of equality and justice, and Arthur's eventual role of Camelot reflects these themes of like fairness, justice, and that idea of comitatus and having this equality with his knights.
Yeah, we're just kind of seeing how his upbringing, the values he was taught, and how he ruled as this young ruler. It's just setting us up for how he's going to end up ruling for the rest of his kingship. Arthur is just a very good king.
These knights are going to be loyal to him because they're getting his land and
Yeah.
status.
I
it's
respect him.
It's
for
a good
being-
way to keep people happy.
Yeah.
And keep respect as a king.
Such a good point. You get respect by respecting others, and
Right.
he respects others no matter who they are. Like his knights, he is a very respectful man.
So the next part of Tale 1 that we're going to get into is Arthur's wedding and the formation of the Round Table. Most of Arthur's life, he's ruled under the help and counsel of Merlin. Just again, how much of a helpful figure he has in really building
Yeah.
Arthur up. And so Arthur needs a wife. So he's going for Guinevere, and King Laudegran is happy to give his daughter up. And so, as a nice wedding gift, he gives Arthur the round table of some honored knights with the condition of him filling the remaining 50 seats at this table. By this marriage seemingly going well, Merlin does warn Arthur that Guinevere is not very wholesome, which, what do y'all think about that? That kind of does foreshadow her being unfaithful to him.
Yeah, he's definitely hinting at... Well, it could also have to do with the fact that Arthur's already slept with her and they
True.
weren't married.
Exactly.
So,
And I mean, King Arthur says, "This fair lady is passingly welcome to me, for I have loved her long."
which bothers me because I feel like a lot of times these kings are misusing the word love. I just don't understand how they can love these women when they don't even know them very well. And I mean, I feel like they're confusing love for coveting. Like, I think that they are lusting and that it's not loving, you know, and that's something I feel like medieval times or these medieval kings tend to tarnish the word love.
Right? It reminds me a lot of like the term limerence, which is a state of intense romantic infatuation or obsession with another person.
But it's not love. Let's get one thing straight.
No, they have they're creating this utopian ideal where they have this perfect vision of like what their kingship is supposed to be with their knights and their round table.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's not as perfect as it seems.
No.
Those are good points. And so continuing on, they get married and they have this nice big wedding banquet, but it's interrupted by a white hart or stag chased by a small hunting dog.
Yeah, and originally, I was like, what does this mean? And the heart's appearance, it can also be seen as a foreshadowing of the eventual betrayal and turmoil that we see between Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot and their love triangle. And the heart's chased by the dog, and it can be representative of the pursuit of something elusive and unattainable, much like that love triangle that we see that develops between Lancelot, Guinevere, and Arthur.
That's actually a really interesting point.
Yeah, no, I agree that there's a lot of like foreshadowing of fate that goes on in these situations where seemingly it's a natural thing, but it could mean something different.
So we see the formation of the round table here, and we talked about how Arthur rules to this round table. It's showing us how he's an equal and just king, but it's not really equal because we've definitely talked about in class how people that sit closer to him have higher importance. Again, we're just seeing how, like, Arthur's ruling is set up in his earlier years.
And it's set up to make them feel like equals.
Yeah.
And so they feel like they have an honor and duty to the king, and they have this status of being sat at the round table.
Yeah.
And we get into that a little bit later with the oath, but these knights are basically pledging their loyalty in order to have this status in return.
Yeah.
And this brotherhood among the knights and this idealized image of equality and justice between the king and his knights is often tested because it reveals the personal ambitions and rivalries that come with like whoever's closer to Arthur. And
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. So then we go right into the Pentecostal oath section of Tale 1. And so for those of you who don't know, the Pentecostal oath is a key event in the Arthurian legend. It's referring to this vow that is taken by the Knights of the Round Table during the Pentecost feast, which occurs around the Christian holiday of Pentecost. And so these knights are swearing on this oath to uphold certain principles. So here Arthur is really establishing his knight's values as well as his kingdom values and what he rules for.
Right, and this oath is just saying, kind of in the simplified terms, is that they're swearing to never commit murder, unjust violence, never to fight for wrongful quarrels and only for just causes, to give mercy to those who ask for it, to help the vulnerable and the weak, and to also behave honorably and stay loyal to King Arthur. And so why this matters is it's kind of setting that moral and ethical foundation for King Arthur to be so successful in his kingdom. And it shows that the knighthood is a vision of service and not just about status and power, that they really do want to serve their king.
Going forward, we get the story of Merlin and Nynaeve, and we see Merlin become obsessed with a damsel, and he's constantly following her around, and he can't stand to be away from her.
Yeah, that's giving obsessed.
Yeah, and she's only nice to him so she could learn magic from him, and she's using this to manipulate him to never use magic on her.
Why am I kind of proud of her a little bit?
Her girl boss.
I mean, it's the first time he's kind of getting outsmarted.
I know.
Yeah,
it's
which I
nice
like.
to see the tables turned a little bit.
Exactly. They then travel to Cornwall, where Nynaeve traps Merlin in a stone using magic that she learned from him, which is really funny because this is a full circle moment here, because Nynaeve is using the powers that she learned from Merlin to ultimately defeat him. So
I don't know if we've mentioned this, but if you actually read this prose, you'll notice that Merlin's name, not only does it change spellings a ton of times, it's also just abbreviated with the letter M, and it does that a lot, especially in the Merlin and Nynaeve section. And so this is actually done a lot, and it's done to reflect his disguise and his power. So I think that just goes to show you just how sneaky and power-hungry Merlin is, that they literally change his name to reflect that when people write about him. So.
But how sneaky is he, though? Because
He just got outsmarted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she got to.
By a woman.
Yes,
He was
her.
so in love. It's finally, love, like we've been
Right.
saying, is not actually love. But he was so encaptured by her.
It weakened him. He wasn't able to catch it when she
Yeah.
flipped on him.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of the excerpts of Tale 1, and I kind of just wanted to take this time to recap everything we mentioned and all the different points we brought up. So some of the common things that we've brought up have been the issue of rape in these past situations, the role of fate in Arthur's kingship, the different ways that we've seen Merlin depicted in this story and in previous stories we've read, and just how the Round Table came to be and how it established how Arthur is going to rule.
And so that is all we have time for today.
Thanks for tuning in.
And don't forget to catch us next week as we finish Les Mortes d'Arthur.
And always remember, chivalry's not dead.